Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will be in Washington later today to meet with President Biden and speak at the Reagan Center. The NATO summit could prove to be a major turning point for Ukraine. There are talks going on behind the scenes to label Ukraine's path to NATO membership as, quote, irreversible. This comes as the death toll from the latest widespread Russian strikes across Ukraine, standing now at 39 with more than 360 injured. One of the buildings hit was a children's hospital in Kyiv. Look at some of these grim images. A new picture coming in of an injured child, that small body smeared with blood. And that's where we've joined CNN's Fred Pleitgen. Fred, I mean, the world has just been outraged over the strike on that children's hospital. How crucial is Zelensky's presence here in Washington? How big of a trip is it for President Zelensky?
Well, I think it's become all the more crucial now that this happened. I'm actually at the impact site where that rocket hit right now, right at that children's hospital, which, by the way, Jim, is the biggest children's hospital in all of Ukraine, but also one of the biggest in all of Europe. And you can see behind me, this is one of the main buildings that was hit. It's just absolute rubble. And you can see there that there's still a medical device in that rubble. I'm not exactly sure what that is. But of course, that's one of the other things about all of this. Of course, you have a massive death toll here in this hospital. It was 2 who were killed and dozens who were injured. But across the city, it was 29 people. But of course, Ukraine is a country right now that needs its medical infrastructure. And certainly that medical infrastructure, especially as far as care for children is concerned, has now been badly hit. And now if we pan over there, you can just see that this entire part of the building here has been completely annihilated by that blast. You can still see some of those rooms that were part of the hospital. So certainly this was a massive explosion that took place, and you're absolutely right. It's caused a big outrage all over the world, and certainly here in Ukraine. The Russians had been saying that they believed it might have been a stray Ukrainian surface-to-air missile system that might have caused all this, an interceptor, as they put it. The Ukrainians, Jim, not having any of that. They're saying it was a Russian rocket. They're calling this a deliberate attack on their healthcare system, a deliberate attack on the children in Ukraine. And again, what Kylie was talking about is absolutely one of the big issues here when you're on the ground in Kyiv as well, and that is those air defense systems. The Ukrainians are hoping that while Volodymyr Zelensky is there in Washington, D.C., that he can get more pledges for more air defense systems that can help prevent what we saw here yesterday, Jim.
Yeah, and Fred, I did want to ask you about India's Prime Minister Modi on a state visit to Russia. This is a friendly visit, and I want to show this image to our viewers of Modi. There he is, the leader of India, and Vladimir Putin hugging one another right after this bombing of this children's hospital. What's the reaction around the world to this? What do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, the reaction from the Ukrainians has been one of outrage. In fact, Volodymyr Zelensky himself, who was on his way, of course, to Washington, D.C., to the NATO summit as all of this was happening. We have to keep in mind, Jim, that these were essentially almost simultaneous events, because Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, he was on his way to Russia when this strike happened here in Kyiv. And Volodymyr Zelensky, he came out and he said that this was a huge disappointment for him and a big blow, as he put it, to international peace efforts as well. One of the things that he said, which I think was quite interesting, he said that for him, it was an outrage to see the leader of the world's largest democracy speak with someone who the Ukrainians say was responsible for what happened on the ground here. So there is a certain sense of outrage, especially in light of the fact that the Ukrainians, and of course the U.S. as well, are saying that the Indians are essentially giving the Russians an economic lifeline by purchasing so much crude oil from Russia, Jim.
And that's a very crucial point. It is certainly one of the things keeping Putin afloat right now. Fred Pleitgen in Kyiv for us. Thank you very much.
Ibold Alder is a former U.S. ambassador to NATO and the current CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and he joins us now from Washington as this NATO summit gets underway. I want to go first to the issue on the ground in Ukraine and then go more to what is facing this NATO summit. In terms of Ukraine itself, we have seen President Zelensky try and move the needle so many times over the last few months. Do you think this is where he is going to put down his red line, really juxtapose the hospital and the destruction that we just saw and say, look, to his allies, you must not shackle Ukraine, either with the kinds of weaponry that you can give to us or with how we use that weaponry?
No doubt. I mean, this is a macabre message that Vladimir Putin is sending, not to not just to Ukraine, but to the world, and in particular to the 32 NATO leaders who are here in Washington. The killings of the bombing of a hospital, let alone a children's hospital, just shows the brutality of this man and this regime. And I think President Zelensky, who has been an incredibly effective advocate for his country, will come and demand exactly what you are saying. One, we need the air defense systems, the Patriot systems. And I actually think there will be good news at the summit, an announcement of more systems coming to Ukraine in the next few weeks and months. But secondly, we can't fight this horror of Russia, this terrible regime, with a hand tied behind our backs. We need to be able to target Russian systems that are attacking Ukraine directly. We need the intelligence to allow us to do that, and frankly, we need the weapons that we have to go after those forces. And I think the argument is going to be strong, and I very much hope that the President of the United States and others will agree to do that.
Now, this brings the issue of NATO at 75 years and its effectiveness as a deterrent against menacing nations front and center for everyone. I want to deal first with the issue of U.S. leadership. Now, we have in front of us a diminished president, arguably. He himself admits that he doesn't want to put that much on his schedule. On top of that, the president already had apologized to President Zelensky that the military aid was held up for so long in Congress before it actually came through. In the face of that diminished leadership from the U.S. for now, how should allies be reacting here, especially when you still have countries like Hungary and Turkey at the table who may not be thrilled about the focus on Russia and NATO being a deterrent effect first and foremost for its aggression?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't underestimate how important the American contribution to Ukraine is. The aid did finally make it through, and it's true that it was 6 months late, but without that aid, the situation today inside Ukraine would be far, far different, and we would be having a conversation about how do we rescue what is left of Ukraine, and how do we deal with the large stream of refugees that were coming out. So the aid is important. But it is also increasingly clear, and it's increasingly clear to European leaders, that they need to be able to do more for their own security, not because the United States demands it, but because they should demand it. And indeed, that is happening. We see a very large increase in defense spending that is particularly grown in the last 3 years under President Biden. We moved from 6 countries meeting the 2% GDP deadline when President Biden in his first year to 23 today. And we have $180 billion being spent each and every year, more now than when President Biden came into office. So things are changing in the right direction. American leadership remains important. I don't believe that President Biden is incapable of doing so. I think we will see in these 2 days that he will continue to be the country and the leader that leaders look to. We have an excellent team in our foreign and defense ministers to deal with this issue, and everyone knows that the alternative to Joe Biden and the alternative to an administration dedicated to NATO is a person who would like to withdraw from NATO, who doesn't see any value in NATO, and frankly thinks that he can negotiate with Vladimir Putin.
But by your reasoning, then, that makes Biden's efforts going forward and the fact that he must appear to have strength and vigor in the coming days even more important. I do want to get to your analysis that you've made clear over several years, right, that Donald Trump does not buy the concept of NATO as a deterrent force against Russia or any other menacing nation for that matter. What should we expect, do you think, from a second Trump term? What are the allies preparing for? And can they really Trump-proof NATO itself?
Well, what the allies are preparing for is the reality that they can no longer depend on the United States, that they can't trust the United States to be there when they need it. Alliances are first and foremost based on trust, on the idea that an attack against one is an attack against all, and that therefore everyone will come to your defense if you are attacked. I think Donald Trump has made serious doubts about whether he would do so, and it's those doubts that matter. They matter to the allies, and frankly, they matter to Russia and to the threats that we face, who might want to probe and see how far they can get away with this lack of respect for the tradition of our alliances. So I think Europe will start to do more, and it is doing more, and it has been doing more in order to be less dependent on the United States. Now, that is a good thing no matter who is the president of the United States. We should encourage the Europeans to do that, but we should do it through persuasion and diplomacy, not through threats to not fulfill our treaty commitments, because those threats are counterproductive. And I think as we look at the record and compare the record of President Biden to President Trump when it comes to NATO unity, NATO strength, NATO defense spending, all of which have significantly improved over the last 3 years, even compared to the 4 years of the Trump presidency. And that's what the Europeans want. They will want an America that they can trust. And if they can't trust it, they will have to figure out a way to use their considerable economic potential to do more themselves and defend themselves. But that is a world that makes all of us less secure.